All right, so it is extremely rare that we actually get the ability to see some of these oil executives that have spent the last number of decades lying to the American people about climate change, actively funding misinformation campaigns, while completely destroying the ability for us to maintain a future habitable planet, face some sort of accountability. But we actually got a little bit of this yesterday, and so I wanted to bring you guys a number of clips from progressives who are in the House basically running this hearing where they brought together 6 major oil executives to face questions specifically pertaining to their role in climate change and how their companies have lied over the last number of years on this issue. So again, bare minimum accountability here. Okay, we're not talking about actually facing any sort of real concrete accountability in the terms of the crimes that they have been committing over the last number of decades, literally killing countless amounts of people around the world with their destructive action. But we're going to get to a lot of that, and I just want to give you a little bit of a breakdown here in terms of what this hearing was actually about, and then I'm going to show you a bunch of the best clips from this hearing. So watch here from Common Dreams. Watch inspiring House progressives grill big oil CEOs on climate lies. Quote, let's hope that this sort of bravery is contagious and spreads all the way to the Oval Office. So, I mean, this is a pretty idealistic way of framing this issue. Honestly, I wouldn't necessarily call it inspiring. What I would call inspiring would be if progressives would use the leverage that they have right now in order to block the current Build Back Better agenda to ensure that there are much more substantial climate investments in it. That's what inspiring would actually look like to me. But again, this is really more the bare minimum accountability, because these oil executives have never faced accountability for the really crimes against humanity that they are responsible for. But just to give you a perspective in terms of what this hearing was actually about. So while congressional Republicans on Thursday repeatedly apologized to big oil executives for Democrats' demands that their companies stop lobbying against climate action, progressive lawmakers took turns grilling the fossil fuel industry leaders, and the questioning came during a U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Reform hearing that featured testimony from top figures at the fossil fuel companies BP America, Chevron, Exxon Mobil, and Shell Oil, as well as 2 trade groups, the American Petroleum Institute, the API, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and concluded with a subpoena announcement. And this was led by Ro Khanna, the chair of the panel's subcommittee on the environment, and he questioned Exxon Mobil CEO Darren Woods about the company's long track record of denying climate science, which has been detailed in a long series of investigations over the past 6 years. So let's go ahead and start out here with Ro Khanna. This is kind of just a baseline introductory clip. The rest of the clips down the line are going to be a little bit more spicy here, but here we see an oil executive completely incapable of actually admitting to some of the lies that his company and former executives were peddling. So here's Ro Khanna.
Representative Comer, you would never today endorse statements that blatantly contradict climate science, correct?
Correct.
And so if an organization, for example, today were to say they do not believe in the linkage between fossil fuels and warming, I assume you would say that's false, correct?
I wouldn't support that statement.
You would say it's false?
In looking at the full context of the statement, I'd make a judgment on that, but that's...
I mean, you would say it's false that there's no linkage between fossil fuels and warming, correct? I mean...
The combustion of fossil fuels leads to emissions, which is linked to climate change, yes.
Okay. And I assume you know that your former Exxon CEO, Lee Raymond, made exactly that statement in 2002, nearly 25 years after Exxon's report. He said, quote, he does not believe, quote, that the science establishes the linkage between fossil fuels and warming. Now, I'm glad you admitted that that statement is false, and I really don't want to dwell on the past. But in the spirit of giving you the chance to turn the page for the company, I assume you would acknowledge that Mr. Raymond's statement was a mistake and the company regrets it, correct?
I think Mr. Raymond's statement was consistent with the science at the time.
I don't even want to argue that, Mr. Woods. I don't even want to argue that. We could go back and forth. You said it's a false statement. When I make a statement that's wrong, when most people make a statement that's wrong, they say, okay, it's a mistake, we regret it. I'm just asking you for that. I assume now that it's a false statement that the company regrets making it and would acknowledge that, right?
I think the expectation would be that we'd look at that at the time it was said, and years ago that was.
But forget whether it was consistent or not. Can you just acknowledge that it was a mistake to make? If someone makes a mistake, just say it was a mistake, and you regret that statement was out there. Would you say that?
I don't think it's fair to judge something 25 years ago with what we've learned since that.
Well, I'm disappointed that you're not even willing to say that something is a mistake. Doesn't inspire a lot of confidence about, introspection and going forward. I'm surprised, actually. I thought you would just say it's a mistake. It's not asking you much to say, hey, it's a mistake that someone's put that out.
Right, so listen, Ro Khanna frames this entire situation as if, oh, this is an opportunity for you to redeem your company's reputation. Obviously, I think that is way too generous of a proposition to make, that simply admitting that previous executives outright lied about their claims surrounding climate change, that would somehow redeem their role in climate change. I don't think that would be anything close to it, okay? I think these oil executives are literally criminals, okay? They have spread misinformation over the years, and we know this, and it has obviously disastrous consequences. But again, the report that he was just talking about here from Scientific American. So Exxon knew about climate change almost 40 years ago, and a new investigation shows the oil company understood the science before it became a public issue and spent millions to promote misinformation. So listen, we're talking about 40 years ago, and this executive was just sitting there with the audacity to say, a statement made by a previous executive 25 years ago, that it's unfair to somehow characterize that as if he was lying. No, he literally was lying. We know this because of internal Exxon documents, okay? So that is a verifiable fact, and this oil executive is yet again lying to protect the interests of his company, and that's pretty obvious there. So honestly, I think in that first clip, Ro Khanna, didn't even necessarily go hard enough on this guy, because he's blatantly lying, and we know this has modern consequences as well, because Exxon lobbyist, we saw this, I covered this on my channel multiple times, but an Exxon lobbyist was caught on video talking about undermining Biden's climate push, and basically this guy openly admitted that he has weekly calls with Joe Manchin, who is himself a millionaire coal baron, who basically makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from his investments in a coal company, one of the dirtiest coal companies in West Virginia, and this guy is taking weekly phone calls with Exxon lobbyists. So it just shows you the blatant and brazen corruption baked within the United States political system. It's like, it's not even hidden, it's not even, they don't even bother to do it like necessarily behind closed doors anymore. They just kind of openly admit their corruption and expect that Americans are just going to sit back and be like, well, I guess that's just how the system works, right? But this guy, again, not even willing to admit the very bare minimum on his company's previous responsibility for this. And now we have AOC basically asking him directly, have you been lobbying against the current climate legislation that is on the table right now in the Build Back Better agenda? And he basically just admits it.
Have you participated in any calls with members of Congress throughout this process of reconciliation and infrastructure?
I have.
You have. Are political donations ever discussed during your calls with members of Congress?
No, they're not.
Have you?
Right, so he is under, obviously he is under an oath right here, so technically he should not be lying in this situation. Now, do I believe him that none of these donations are ever brought up in these conversations? Maybe they don't directly bring them up, but it's implied. It is understood that when companies like his donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to people's campaigns, that there's going to be an exchange of goods for that, right? And the exchange of goods is combating climate legislation, okay? It's nothing secret. If this guy is admitting that he is actively lobbying, the full force of his multi-billion-dollar company is actively lobbying against climate change legislation from being actually passed, then it's pretty obvious what's going on behind closed doors. It is corruption, it is brazen, it is out in the open yet again, and here we have a literal oil executive admitting that he is currently trying to block current climate legislation from being passed. So again, this is just the blatant and open corruption that is baked within the US political system. This should be a crime, in my opinion, okay? It is literally a crime against humanity, because it's not as if this doesn't have consequences. We know the immediate consequences, we know the future long-term consequences of literally not having a sustainable future planet to inhabit, and this guy is just talking about it so casually, as though he has some sort of a right to doom the future of the planet for his own personal company's profit margins. It's just completely pathetic and completely ridiculous that these people are not locked up behind bars for the rest of their lives, because again, if we're talking about proportionately their responsibility in creating future chaos and death and destruction that is inevitably going to come as a consequence of climate change, these motherfuckers are some of the biggest criminals on the planet, at least in my opinion. But we continue on here with a good clip from Katie Porter, who is pretty famous for absolutely rolling over a lot of these executives, whether it's big pharma executives, oil executives, whoever it is. It seems like whenever they are put in front of Katie Porter, that she seems to have a lot of the little gimmicks ready to go to attack them. And so this was just one example of that, putting in perspective how little these coal and these oil companies are actually taking climate change seriously, and how little they are actually investing in the future of renewable energy as they continue to put out ad marketing campaigns and commercials everywhere. I mean, I just saw one yesterday myself when I was watching an NBA basketball game. It was a Chevron commercial where they came out and they were pretending as if they were investing heavily in renewable energy. But you see from this clip that they are not investing seriously in renewable energy, and Katie Porter outlines that perfectly here with some M&Ms, I think.
A lot about future plans for investment in renewable energy today. Ms. Watkins, Shell's 2020 annual report called for between $19 and $22 billion in near-term spending. I'm representing that with this container of M&Ms. Each M&M represents about $50 million in spending. Ms. Watkins, how much has Shell said it will spend in the near term on oil, gas, and chemical operations?
I think you just said we're going to be spending between $18 and $20 billion this year.
That's near term on total spending. How much on oil, gas, and chemical operations?
We're going to be spending.
Well, according to your annual report, you said you're going to spend 16 to 17 billion for oil, gas, and chemical, with another $3 billion for marketing. How much is Shell spending to spend on renewable energy?
This year we'll be spending between $2 and $3 billion. $2
and $3 billion on renewables and energy solutions. In your testimony, you said, quote, meeting the demand for reliable energy while simultaneously addressing climate change is a huge undertaking and one of the defining challenges of our time. Shell has made these promises before. Shell pledged to spend $6 billion between 2017 and 2020 on renewable energy. How much of that did Shell actually spend? The answer is about half. Ms. Watkins, does this look like a huge undertaking to you?
Congresswoman, what I can tell you is that there needs to be both a demand and a supply of clean energy, which is why we're working very closely with our customers so that that demand increases over time and we are
Ms.
ready
Watkins,
to supply.
To me, this does not look like an adequate response to one of the defining challenges of our time. This is greenwashing. Shell is trying to fool people into thinking that it's addressing the climate crisis when what it's actually doing is to continue to put money into fossil fuels.
Right. So I think that was actually like a really important point that she made there. And just to give you a perspective in terms of how much that executive was bullshitting in terms of, the supply and demand of renewable energy. OK, there's this common talking point amongst Republicans and even conservative Democrats, especially like Joe Manchin, that it's just a simple matter of supply and demand, that renewables are just simply they're not affordable enough yet. And, maybe we'll get there in the future. But don't worry, the capitalist free market is going to solve it eventually. And when renewable energies simply become profitable or more profitable than they already are, then we'll begin the transition and it will all just happen naturally, right? That is the lie that is being peddled by gigantic oil companies. That's why they run commercials pretending to care about climate change, as she was just saying, while not actually taking it seriously. But listen, the actual reality of this is that the fossil fuel industry is literally subsidized to the tune of $6 trillion in just 2020 alone. Okay, so when capitalist gigantic billion-dollar oil companies pretend like this is just a simple matter of the free market, no, it's not the free market at all. Your entire industry is being propped up globally by multiple different countries, primarily the United States and China. Your entire industry relies on trillions of dollars a year in subsidies to prop it up and maintain the extraction of these dangerous chemicals and materials from the earth. Okay, that is the reality of the situation. So anytime somebody tells you that it's just a reality that renewable energies aren't as profitable as oil and natural gas and the coal sources that we are using, it's entirely bullshit. Okay, if we were subsidizing the renewable energy market to the tune of $6 trillion a year, I'm sure that the makeup of supply and demand would start to change a little bit there when you have literally government bailouts essentially propping up your entire industry. Okay, so it's a ridiculous bullshit line that they continue to peddle as if capitalism is going to save us from this entire mess. What we actually should be doing if we were taking climate change seriously is nationalizing our energy system here in the United States. Okay, we would not have for-profit billion-dollar oil companies and coal companies getting to decide what our climate change agenda is, let alone just existing in the first place. Okay, we know for a fact what the costs are going to be down the line, and we are simply allowing the short-term profits of these fossil fuel companies to take precedent and to take priority basically over the long-term sustainability and health of the planet. Okay, so it's just completely ridiculous. We are subsidizing our own future destruction, and that's clear in the data here. But finally, I'm going to end it off here. This is a really long video, so I apologize for that. But Rashida Tlaib accuses Chevron CEO of making $29 million for poisoning the planet and says that Chevron owes $50 billion to communities in 31 countries. And the confused CEO has no idea what she's talking about. So let's just go ahead and watch this final clip here because I think this was the best one that I saw.
Mike Wirth, when are you going to cut the check?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure I understand the context for your question.
That's okay. Okay, so
could I, excuse me, I'd like to correct something that you've
sure.
been provided with some inaccurate information. Noble Energy was not a subsidiary of Chevron in 2000.
Okay, you can submit it for the record, sir. So Chevron, you can submit it to the committee. Chevron has about 70 serious cases of environmental and community abuses in 31 countries worldwide, owing over $50 billion in judgments and settlements checks, literally settlement debts that you all have. So, Mike, when are you going to cut the check?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with the number you.
When are you going to cut the $50 billion check that you owe? It went through the courts. You owe $50 billion to communities in 31 countries.
Congresswoman, I'd be happy to take a look at the source for your information on this and get back to you on it, because I have no understanding of what.
Well, I have a message for you as Chevron CEO. I mean, you made what, $29 million last year in poisoning the planet? Mr. Wirth, you can't arrest us all. You can't arrest the truth. Do you understand what I'm trying to say to you?
Congresswoman, I am not exactly following.
So you're targeting and actions against the human rights lawyer Dotzinger. I mean, what you did there, your company, maybe through subsidiaries, I don't know. I just want to remind you, there are more of us than there are of you. You can poison the planet to make money, but we're going to defend the planet so we can live, and we will win. So, I need Chevron to cut the check. You owe $50 billion to indigenous communities and people that you harmed for profit. This is not about vilifying these companies. This is about accountability.
Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it off there, because I think that was a really good moment there, right? She's pressing him on the actual literal dollar amount that these companies owe a lot of these indigenous communities that they have completely eviscerated in the course of their damaging extraction of fossil fuels in different areas around the world. One example that she brought up there was the Stephen Donziger case, and I'm going to do an entire video on Stephen Donziger later today, so go and watch that if you want more details on that. But, I mean, she's 100% right. I know that $50 billion number that she just came up with there, it's not surprising at all. I know for a fact that Chevron currently owes around $10 billion to the indigenous population in the Ecuadorian rainforest, where they basically polluted and destroyed an entire area the size of Rhode Island in the rainforest with their destructive pollution and their behavior in the region. And then instead of actually paying that money that was owed to the Ecuadorian people, they turned around and launched a full-scale assault on the human rights lawyer who was representing the indigenous Ecuadorian population there. So, she's bringing up a perfect example here of corporations refusing to take accountability, specifically oil corporations refusing to take accountability for the pollution that they have caused around the planet and literally not paying on the debts that are owed. So she's 100% right to call him out on that. And the CEO sits there and pretends like he doesn't even know who Stephen Donziger is. He's an absolute liar, as are the rest of this so-called slippery six, as they are being called. But listen, this is yet again a tiny, rare opportunity that we have for these oil executives to be pressured and face accountability. And this is nowhere close to actual accountability for the crimes against humanity that they are responsible for. But it's somewhat nice to see them actually have to face some level of public scrutiny for the crimes that they are responsible for. So hopefully this leads to more meaningful climate action. We're going to get to see how that unfolds with the current Build Back Better agenda, as all of the climate provisions have essentially been completely gutted or hollowed out or watered down to where they are nowhere close to what we actually need to invest in climate change right now. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but it's nice to see at least a little bit of pressure, the minimalist amount of accountability being applied on these criminals.